So glad that you could join us today for Academic Satire and the Campus Novel with Professor Julie Schumacher. I am Stephanie Johnson, Chair of the English Department at the College of St. Scholastica, and on behalf of the Library and the English Department, I'm so pleased to welcome you to this wonderful afternoon gathering. I have a few announcements to make first before the introduction. Our plan for the hour is to invite Professor Schumacher to read selections from her novels and to speak about her work and about academic satire, and then to open up the session for questions and answers. To pose a question, please use the Q&A tool on your Zoom toolbar to type it in. It's most likely at the bottom of your screen, and I'll do my best to pose as many of them as possible during the Q&A time. Introducing Julie Schumacher to you would be a joy at any time because I am so admiring and appreciative of her work. But during this year when our literary gatherings are few and far between, it's especially joyful. Julie is a faculty member in the Creative Writing Program and the Department of English at the University of Minnesota. She holds degrees from Oberlin and Cornell, and her first novel, The Body is Water, published in 1995, was an ALA Notable Book of the Year and a finalist for the PEN/Hemingway Award. Her 2014 novel, Dear Committee Members, won the Thurber Prize for American Humor, and she's the first woman ever to have received this award. Its sequel, The Shakespeare Requirement, was published in 2018. Her work is smart and very, very funny, insightful, thoughtfully unsettling, yet satisfying, sometimes biting, and always compassionate. Hers are the only campus novels that I recommend wholeheartedly, which I do to just about anyone who seems receptive. Please join me in welcoming Julie Schumacher in whatever way Zoom will allow. Julie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone could hear me. It's such a strange world we live in where we speak to each other through screens. Thanks so much to Stephanie Johnson, to Brad Snelling, who invited me, Ryan Vine, I understand your class is here, and to Heidi Johnson. It's a sort of a strange burden to have won a humor award. I have found that people expect me to be funny a lot of the time. I hope that sometimes that's the case, but as my husband and children will tell you, I'm not all that funny most of the time. I feel like I have created characters who are funny in ways that I am often not sure how to be. That to me is one of the great things about fiction, is you can make these alternate versions of yourself and send them out into the world to do things and say things that you might never have the courage to do. I think it's a great time for humor writing and for satire. You know, it's humor often comes out of stress and out of difficult circumstances. And that's, I would say, where both of these books came from, Dear Committee Members and The Shakespeare Requirement. I never set out to write something that would be either a campus novel or a satire. I don't think it ever occurred to me when I was younger that one day I would get a job at a university and figure out a way in which to subtly poke fun at that job. That never dawned on me at all, but here is a bit of how that happened. I think of humor writing not as the province of someone who is necessarily funny, but someone who has put on a certain lens, a certain way of looking at the world. And that's what I have tried to do with my characters in both of these books. So Dear Committee Members, the first of these two academic satires, it is written in the form of letters of recommendation. They are all written by my main character, Jason Fitger. He is a professor of English and creative writing at Payne University, P-A-Y-N-E, in the Midwest. The way the book came about was interesting, I think. It began when I was teaching an undergraduate creative writing class at the University of Minnesota, and I gave my students a writing exercise. Some of them were unsure where to start. You know, the blank page is sometimes a terrifying thing when one wants to write. And I said to them, rather than beginning with a character, which we had already tried, or a setting, why not think about a shape or a form? I told them, for example, if you know something about music, is there a way in which you can use your knowledge of that activity, that form, to create a short story? Could you use emails between friends or recipes collected in a grandparent's kitchen drawer or things found in an archaeological dig? I told them, find something that you know a little bit about, whether it's, you know, dogs or ice cream, whatever it might be, and see if you can find a way to discover within that interest a form, a shape. They were a little baffled by this set of instructions. And they said to me, well, is this how you usually begin a piece of writing? I said, no, I don't normally do this, but I want you guys to try it out. And they gave me a hard time about that, as they should have, and said, you need to name a form. What would your form be? I was in the midst of what I like to call letter of recommendation writing season, which is the fall. And I was writing a lot of letters for my students, for various awards, for grad school, for different things. So I said, my form is the letter of reference. That is something I know a bit about. I write them a lot. And it never occurred to me to write something in that form. But when I mentioned the idea to a colleague, he said to me, you should try that. That's interesting. I like the idea of trying to experiment when I write, of thinking of whatever I am writing not as a large, serious project. That's usually daunting to me. I like to think of a piece of writing as an amusing experiment that if it doesn't work out, I will chuck it. So that's the spirit in which I began this book, dear committee members. Again, not as an attempt to write a satire or a funny book, but to write a book in a particular shape, that is the letter of reference. And I had what I saw as two main challenges at the beginning of thinking about the book. I thought, number one, how am I going to portray my main character if that main character is always writing about other people, always saying, please accept my former student, John Smith, for this job. Please award Mary Jones this fellowship. How would I convey who my letter writer is? I thought, well, I think I will do it by making this letter writer incredibly egotistical, wildly inappropriate, someone who would, rather than writing about Mary Jones, would write about himself all the time in his letters. So I thought that would be one hurdle tackled. The other, I thought, well, you know, maybe I need to have certain people that he writes about more than once. So I'll read a few of these letters. Most of them are short in the novel, and maybe you'll get an idea of what I mean. So this is a letter from early on in the novel. He's writing, Jason Ficker is writing a letter of reference on behalf of a student. And the letter begins, September 9, 2009, Mary Alice Ingersoll, manager, Wexler Foods, Inc., 65409 Capitol Drive, Maplewood, Minnesota, 55109. Dear Ms. Ingersoll, this letter is intended to bolster the application to Wexler Foods of my former student, John Lazinski, who completed the junior-senior creative writing workshop 3 months ago. Mr. Lazinski received a final grade of B, primarily on the basis of an 11-page short story about an inebriated man who tumbles into a cave and surfaces from an alcoholic stupor to find that a tentacled monster, a sort of fanged and copiously salivating octopus, if memory serves, is gnawing through the flesh of his lower legs the monster spittle burbling ever closer to the victim's groin. Although chaotic and improbable, even within the fantasy horror genre, the story was solidly constructed. Dialogue consisted primarily of agonized groans and screaming. The chronology was relentlessly clear. Mr. Lazinski attended class faithfully, arriving on time, and rarely succumbed to the undergraduate impulse to check his cell phone for messages or relentlessly zip and unzip his backpack in the final moments of class. Whether punctuality and an enthusiasm for flesh-eating cephalopods are the main attributes of the ideal Wexler employee, I have no idea, but Mr. Lazinski is an affable young man, reliable in his habits, and reasonably bright. You might want to start him off in produce rather than seafood or meats. Whimsically yours, Jason Fitker, Payne University. There are a number of letters like that one that are what I refer to as one-offs, written for a student whom the reader never sees again. But there are a number of letters that Jason Fitker writes also on behalf of colleagues. Some of these colleagues are people he's not terribly fond of, and one of them is his colleague Franklin Cantrell. So I will read this letter. September 14, 2009. Ted Bote, resident sociologist and chair, Department of English. There's been a chair appointed to the department from the sociology program because no one in English will chair his department. Dear Ted, you have asked me to write a letter seconding the nomination of my colleague Franklin Cantrell for Payne's coveted Davidson chair. I assume that Cantrell himself is behind this request. No sane person would nominate a man whose only recent publications consist of personal genealogical material and who wears visible sock garters in class. All he lacks is a white tin basin to resemble a 19th century barber. But if you want me to endorse his nomination in order to keep him quiet and away from your office, you will find him as persistent and maddening as a fly. You may excerpt the following sentences and affix my name to them. Quote, Professor Franklin Cantrell has a singular mind and a unique approach to the discipline. The Davidson chair has never seen his like before, unquote. A word on the call for official written letters of recommendation, Ted. I hope for the sake of all concerned, you will cut back on these as much as possible. The letter of rec has become a rampant absurdity, usurping the place of the quick consultation and the 2-minute phone call, not to mention the teaching and research that faculty were supposedly hired to perform. I haven't published a novel in 6 years. Instead, I fill my departmental hours casting words of praise into the bureaucratic abyss. On multiple occasions, serving on award committees, I was actually required to write letter of recs to myself. Keeping my temper under wraps for the present, I am yours, Jay. So those are two early letters, and there are a number of letters that he writes also to his ex-wife. His ex-wife, Janet, is an admissions officer at the law school at Payne University. And I created her in part as an effort to try to tie the book together because I knew he could write multiple letters to her on behalf of various students. So I will read one of those. They are not very happily divorced and probably were not very happily married at the time when they were married. So this letter begins September 22, 2009, Payne University Law School admissions, care of Janet Mathias, AKA Janet Mathias Fitker, 17 Pittlinger Hall. Dear admissions committee members and Janet, this letter recommends Melanie De Rueda for admission to the law school on the well-heeled side of our campus. I have known Ms. De Rueda for 11 minutes, 10 of which were spent in a fruitless attempt to explain to her that I write letters of recommendation only for students who have signed up for and completed one of my classes. This young woman is certainly tenacious if that's what you're looking for. A transfer student, she appears to be suffering under the delusion that a recommendation from any random faculty member within our institution will be the key to her application's success. Janet, I know your committees aren't reading these blasted letters. Under the influence of our final martini in August, you told me as much. I wish I had an ex-wife like you in every department. Over in the fellowship office, the formerly benevolent Carol continues to maintain an icy distance. I should have thought her decision to quit our relationship would have filled her with a cheerful burst of self-esteem, but she apparently views the end of our 3 years together in a different light. Ms. De Rueda claims to be sending her transcripts and her LSAT scores to you at the end of this week. God help you. This is your shot across the bow, should you admit her. Still affectionately, your one-time husband, Jay. So those are a bunch of early letters, and I hope people will feel free to cut in and ask questions as we go. I am amenable to anything that we're up for here, and I know that being on Zoom can be wearing after a while, hearing me yammer away here. So just feel free to interject at any time. Let's see. Ficker is not a terribly admirable person. I try not to identify entirely with him. And sometimes people have asked me, to what extent am I writing about my real experiences at work? I work in academia. He's a professor of English. Do I still have colleagues who will speak to me? Have I outed them all with their strange habits and their foibles? And I always answer, I love my job. I have a terrific job at the University of Minnesota, and I would never have satirized my position, academia in general, if it weren't something that I truly loved. I don't think of humor as something that is belittling or cruel. I think of it as, again, I suppose that particular lens through which you can view any situation at all. Let's see. One thing, I'll read one other letter, maybe one or two, and then we can take some questions. One issue that Ficker and I do have in common, and I have to say that when I was writing the book, my spouse, who is in academia, also said to me, is this you? Is Jason Ficker supposed to be you? I said, don't be ridiculous. He's a crabby, obnoxious man. He said, but there are a number of things he complains about that you always complain about. True, I said. One of those things is technology. I am not skilled, to say the least, in technological things. And Jason Ficker is often frustrated by technological innovations as well. So this is a letter in which his lack of enthusiasm for technology becomes clear. November 24, 2009. Confidential reference for Cynthia Goldberg. Please complete the following questions to the best of your knowledge. 1. How long and in what capacity have you known the applicant? Greetings, committee members. I have known Ms. Goldberg for almost 3 years. She was my student in 2 undergraduate classes, the 20th Century American Survey, which begin. 2. Give a brief description of the applicant's aptitude and/or past performance. Ms. Goldberg received a B+ in the chaotic welter of the survey, an introductory course designed by this university to function as part academic lecture, part flash mob because of the unrestricted and steadily rising number of enrolled students. In the short story class, Ms. Goldberg received a B-, perhaps unfairly. The size of the 3. Do you know of any reasons why the applicant should not be given responsibility as stated on the list of qualifications above? First, I will finish my response to number 2. Your blasted form cut me off. The survey class enrolled 75 undergraduates, many of whom signed up because of my reputation for Sturm und Drang, bored by the material, that is, books. They nonetheless enjoy watching me pull at what remains of my hair while I stamp back and forth in paroxysms of incredulity at the front of the room. Not granted a teaching assistant to help with the evaluation of essays, I was forced to require in-class exams rather than allow students to draft and revise their work in the quiet sanctity of their dorm rooms. In an ideal world, I would outlaw literature exams entirely. I would also eschew the twin barbarities of attendance and participation as grading criteria necessitated by workload increase. Ms. Goldberg, 4. Are there any other comments you would like to add? Yes, I would like to finish my fucking sentences. I suppose your organization is to be commended for not resorting to the absurd array of little black boxes in which recommenders like me are asked to rate applicants according to A, likelihood of earning a Nobel Prize, B, personal hygiene, C, ability to form coherent sentences not randomly punctuated by like or really or other verbal fluff, but given that your damnable form has cut me off every time I initiate it. Thank you. That's the dreaded online form. I'll read one other letter from this novel, and this letter is closer to the end of the book. And I suppose one of the reasons I want to read this one is that some readers I worried would see my main character, Jason Ficker, as entirely obnoxious, entirely a jerk, unpleasant person that nobody would ever want to spend time with. And I didn't see him that way. I saw him as, yes, obnoxious, yes, capable of being a real jerk, but also someone who has a huge affection for things that matter to me: literature, writing, the creative life, the imagination, the arts and humanities, the strivings of students and their efforts. And I wanted to show that even though he can be a jerk, he really cares very deeply about those things. I see him as a bit of a Quixote figure, I suppose. So he's a bit nostalgic in this letter toward the end of the novel. April 23, 2010, Letitia Alastair, Flanders Nut House, 771 Glass Lake Road, Glass Lake, Wisconsin, 54153. Dear Ms. Alastair, this letter recommends to you my student, Oliver Postiglione, who informs me that he has applied for a summer job at Flanders Nut House at the south end of Glass Lake. In a strange coincidence, I spent one summer during my teenage years, but indelibly impressed upon me, in the timeless village of Glass Lake. And as if I were at this very moment standing on the cracked sidewalk in front of it, I can envision the screen door of the nut house slapping shut in the breeze, and recall the smell of my favorite purchase, the roasted almonds wrapped, still warm and lightly salted, in a paper cone. I hope, for the sake of Mr. Postiglione's dignity, your establishment no longer requires its most junior employee to dress as a human cashew. You will want to ascertain that Mr. Postiglione is trustworthy, hardworking, and of pleasant affect. He is all three. A member of my junior-senior creative writing workshop, he's currently writing a one-act play about a serial killer/scientist who saves humankind from a world-ending virus by discovering a method of harvesting corpses to create a vaccine. The concept is gruesome and not very original, but Mr. Postiglione's workmanlike approach to its completion is to be admired. I hope the gold lettering continues to grace the facade of the nut house, its broad front window perfectly reflecting the water's stillness. Though I've not returned to Glass Lake for 40 years, one never forgets the places in which one felt pure. As for Mr. Postiglione, he will learn quickly, whether waiting on customers behind the pristine white tile counter or assisting with packages in back. I recommend him to you warmly and without hesitation, in part because writing letters of reference such as this one allows me to re-inhabit, if only fleetingly, the pensive knock-kneed person I once was, and to advocate for that former version of myself, as well as for Oliver Postiglione. Please do hire him. I wish him episodes of glorious, sun-washed tedium and a loss of innocence he will contemplate for the rest of his life. Commemoratively, Jason T. Fittger, Professor of Creative Writing and English, Payne. So that's a glimpse of Dear Committee members. There are a few odd things I needed to do during that book, like look up tons of zip codes and addresses.
Julie, there are a couple of questions specifically about this novel, if you'd like to take them now.
Sure.
The first, I think you may have already answered. It has to do with Jason Fittger's character and just why we love and root for him so. And you did speak to that. But then the other has to do with form. So I'll read it to you. You said the letter form, which you hadn't used before, grew out of a prompt you gave your students. Did you write along with your students that semester, or did the novel take shape a bit later? Either way, to what extent have students worked their way into the novel?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think I thought about the novel while my students were writing, and the exercise I gave them was really a one-day prompt. So they went on to many other prompts and writing exercises, and some of them completed a story that was based in a form, but others, went in different directions, which was fine. I usually have an idea sitting in the back of my head for quite some time before I can really decide to tackle it and write about it. I also tend to do most of my writing in the summer when I'm not teaching. Those at your college will understand that issue. The semesters are for working on student papers and the summer for one's own writing. But I did become really enamored with the idea of form. Subsequently, after Dear Committee members, I wrote a short story in the form of a board game, people taking turns and moving around a board game. I always have my eyes out for novels that have particular shapes. There's one that I particularly love called A Box of Matches, which is in the form of a journal. And when I was writing Dear Committee members, I didn't want to read or think about other academic satires, but I did read and reread the Nicholson Baker, A Box of Matches, as well as a slim little work of nonfiction called, 84 or 64 Charing Cross Road? I don't remember the number, something Charing Cross Road, because it's, again, a very tiny book composed only of letters. But even though they're a series of letters over many years, it hangs together as a novel. Structure and plot are hard for me. I like character when I write. And so I'm always on the lookout for ways to create a structure, ways to create a plot. I feel like I left part of that question out, but now I don't quite remember.
I think you did very well. It was about writing along with your students and what extent students worked their way into your novel. But then also Jay Fittger's character, if you'd like to.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't write about any particular students or faculty. Again, I didn't want to go there. I didn't want someone to tell me later, why did you do that? My colleagues were very pleased with the book. They all wanted to make suggestions about the sequel, about other things I ought to put into it. And Fittger, there are things about myself that I gave to Fitker. Again, the frustration with technology, that just kind of drives me crazy. So I thought it would be fun to give it to him. He also battles his upstairs neighbors in the building in which English is housed at Payne University. He's in a building with the Department of Economics, and English at the University of Minnesota has long been in the math and IT building. And so I had some fun with that, I think, as well. Other questions so far, or?
There are some questions about kind of your choices as an author, how you choose names of your characters, but also your choice about retiring characters. There's a question here about some writers write characters for so long and then retire them. Is that something you see yourself doing? So both about how you name characters and then I guess how you envision their lives and afterlives.
Yeah, the naming of characters, I use baby name websites all the time. I look through the phone book for last names. When I was just about finished with Dear Committee Members, I added 1 or 2 additional letters as I was doing final edits and revisions. And there's one at the very end, which there's a ballot in terms of who's going to be elected to the faculty senate. And maybe if I hold it up, you can see there's this ballot with a whole bunch of names on it. And I added it again at the very end. I thought, oh my gosh, now I need a dozen more names. Where am I going to get all these extra names? And I used the names of my nieces and nephews and brothers-in-law and shuffled them up, the first name of a niece and the last name of a nephew, and I just stuffed them all in there, hoping that nobody would mind. As for retiring characters, I love that idea. I never thought about actually retiring a character, and Fitker is the only character about whom I've written more than one novel or story. I usually feel when I've finished a work, I'm exhausted. I'm tired of these people. I want to move on. There's something else in the back of my brain pushing that one project out. And so he's the only one that got another book. I have not retired him yet. I like him. I like him too much.
That's wonderful. I think some of the other questions are about the Shakespeare requirement or more general. So if we wanted to turn to that, I could save those questions for a little bit.
Sure. I can talk about the Shakespeare requirement. What I'll start out by saying is I had so much fun with the form in Dear Committee Members, the letter of recommendation form, that I thought, well, I'll choose some other form for this novel. I thought I couldn't reuse the letter of reference again. That would be too much of a good thing. But initially, with Shakespeare requirement, I was working with the form of a journal. And I had decided that Fitker was going to become chair, as he does at the end of the first novel, of the English department at Payne. And when he becomes chair, he knows he's not going to be very good at it, but he is given, as a sort of consolation gift, a blank book by his wife, ex-wife, Janet Mathias. She was going to tell him, here's this blank journal, keep a chair's log all year long of all the mistakes you are going to make as department head at Payne. And, he was going to keep that log, and the book would proceed with Janet zooming in now and then and altering his comments, editing, having side remarks about everything that he said. So I think I had about 100 pages of the book written as Fitker's log of his first year as department chair. I sent it in to the editor, who was eager to read it and who said, I don't like this at all. That was a discouraging moment. But he was right. I eventually decided he was right. It was too much like the first book, and I couldn't use a form that was that noticeable. I needed to just go into third person and write the book about Fitker and his many wacky colleagues. Um, it was daunting because I had a lot of characters to juggle. I was nervous about it. Again, plot not being my strong point. I was just afraid of trying to juggle all of these different things. But eventually, again, Fitker was enough fun for me that I just enjoyed writing this second book. Let's see. I will read a portion of this one, and you'll get a sense of it having more of a traditional sort of third person shape. You probably just need to know about this section that I'm going to read. It's about 50 pages in. Fitker is about to teach his first class of the semester. He has missed the first class or two because his office was full of wasps, and he was stung by a bunch of wasps. He was allergic to them. He had a reaction. He's still got these lumps all over his face, and he feels deformed because of the stings. Again, he has trouble with technology, and he's teaching a freshman course called The Literature of Apocalypse. So this is an excerpt from that section. Fitker picked up his briefcase and trekked across campus to teach his first class. He normally taught in one of the generic 1970s era buildings east of Willard Hall, just past the gleaming new architectural wonder constructed for the benefit of the business school. But for the current semester, he had been assigned to a nearly decommissioned cinder block slab on a dead-end road between the facilities plant and the women's gym. Pavender Hall, Fitker had heard it mentioned but had never entered it before, was flanked by industrial trash barrels and resembled a colorless brick that had been pressed into the earth by a giant foot. The front entrance was locked, and much of the building appeared to be unused, but Fitker eventually made his way to Pavender 001, a faintly illuminated bunker-like enclosure on the lower floor. Perhaps last used in a low-budget horror film, this windowless chamber had an emergency shower head in one corner and had presumably, at the time of the first atomic explosions, been a science lab. Fitker's 24 Literature of Apocalypse students, all of them freshmen, sat in long rows, some flanking a trough-like metal sink, others hunkered around an eye wash station or a stone-topped table equipped with levers that, when turned, released remnant whiffs of a foul-smelling gas. Pendulum chain-link lamps dangled overhead, suggestive of nooses. Putting his briefcase down by the lectern and taking stock of these surroundings, Fitker heard one of the freshmen say to another, "This is so cool." All right, then, forward. After apologizing for missing their opening session, Fitker glanced at the roster, which he had meant to study in advance in order to pronounce his students' names correctly, too late for that, and confronted the 24 young strangers armed with pristine notebooks and pencils, who for most of their short lives had been hectored about the importance of education. Having purchased a $39,000 ticket, they found themselves seated in a radioactive bunker, their instructor a one-eyed Cthulhu restlessly scratching himself and pacing back and forth on an isthmus of faded carpet at the front of the room. Buying time while shuffling through a stack of paper, he asked them to introduce themselves and to tell him something about their reasons for taking the class. Several students proclaimed an interest in death and stuff. There was nothing like kicking off one's college career with a cheerful survey of the end of the world, while most of the others admitted that the course had fit into their schedules. Fitker chafed at his weeping eye with his swollen hand and promised, in return for the students' full and regular engagement, 14 weeks of scintillating lecture discussion punctuated by 6 short essays, the details of which would soon be revealed. Beginning at the back of the room, near the eye wash station, he was tempted to use it, he distributed the syllabus, which the students, apparently too polite to mention his disfigurement, accepted as if taking communion. After explaining due dates and assignments and quickly calculating the number of student pages, between 700 and 800, that he would have to correct, he went over his standard classroom policies. Eating? No. Drinking? No. Late arrivals or early departures? No. Sleeping or cuddling? No and no. Cheating? Just try it. And the use of technology. Other than mechanical pencils, this would not be permitted. Students should leave all gleaming gewgaws at home and take notes by hand as God intended during class. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a voice softly murmuring, "Is he just talking about our cell phones?" No, he was not. He was talking about iPhones, iPads, laptops, desktops, earbuds, tape recorders, DVD players, Game Boys, mini fridges, pocket pets, laser pointers, calculators, e-readers, slide rules, astrolabes, and, unless they could supply a note from a medical professional, iron lung or dialysis machines. Were there any questions so far about the syllabus? One of 3 students named Sam. This sort of redundancy occurred almost every semester. Ficker wondered if some joker in admissions was deliberately funneling students with the same names into his classes. Politely asked if in written assignments, quote, "You'll be grading us on how we write or on our ideas." Excuse me? Ficker briefly wondered whether it might be possible to ask one of the Sams to shave his head and another to attempt, if at all possible, a beard. "We want to know if you'll be grading us on our ideas or on grammar," another student helpfully said. Ah. At the front of the room, Ficker nodded, leaned back, and settled both hands in the white debris-filled tray of the chalkboard. He so enjoyed these first early encounters with the incoming freshmen, who were as tender and unsuspecting as asparagus tips. Pushing off from the chalkboard and immediately impressing cloudy white handprints on the seat of his pants, he explained to Sam and company that transparency of meaning and lucid expression traveled hand in hand, like Hansel and Gretel through the terrible woods, and furthermore that carelessness in language, syntactical clumsiness, boneheaded usage, confusion of affect and effect, lie and lay, betrayed a dubiety of purpose, threatening to detract not only from the grades they would receive on their essays, but on the aggregate of human knowledge, a transgression that was, on a personal level, extremely painful to their instructor, Professor Jason T. Ficker, who suffered the death of 1,000 cuts when forced to confront these insults to the written word. He clapped his hands, releasing a puff of grayish-white dust. "All clear then? Is everyone with me?" There was no response. Fine. So he may not be the person you would most choose as a professor. And again, I had to invent a lot of, I had to put a lot more people into this other novel, a lot of colleagues. He has lots of interactions with eccentric fellow faculty members and with a few students, grad and undergrad as well.
We have one question about that, actually, what the challenges might have been in moving Jason Ficker from behind the keyboard and out into a cast of characters and a setting as an interacting physical participant.
It was tricky. There were so many things that I didn't need to do or worry about in writing the first book because of that letter of recommendation format. I rarely describe anyone physically, something that I would normally do with a fictional character. I didn't have to worry about transportation with my characters. I didn't have to get Ficker out of his office into a car, back to his home, describe where he lived, because he's just behind that keyboard. And it was the interesting thing about choosing that form was that it did not feel like a restriction. It felt like it opened possibilities for me. I loved having that that restriction of the form. It made a lot of decisions for me that often I would have had to worry about and make myself in writing a book. Setting was only inside the building. You don't have really a sense of where Payne University is, other than it's in the Midwest. It felt really liberating. So Shakespeare requirement felt more daunting to me, just because of all the different choices. I had more options than I like to have when I write. I like to be able to whittle down the options available to me when I start to write. Again, because the the blank page is daunting. It's just a lot to think about. So I liked not having as many things to think about, I guess.
That's wonderful. There are some general questions I think about writing and the writing process, but I don't know if you're ready yet to be done with the Shakespeare requirement. So I'll leave it up to you what we do next.
Well, let's see. I could read one other brief section. Let's see.
That sounds great.
Sure, let's see. And you could cut me off if this goes on too long. This is a colleague of his named Martin Glenk, and he has a hobby farm out in the country. What you need to know in this section is that Fitker has been trying to get his colleagues to sign off on something called the Statement of Vision, the SOV, Statement of Vision. And he's gotten desperate because he has no money for his English department. And in becoming more and more desperate, he's made sort of house calls, going from door to door and office to office of various faculty members to ask them to sign off on this thing. So here's a moment when he drives out to Martin Glenk's place and tries to persuade him. There's also a character named Roland in here, and Roland is the chair of the economics department, who is Fitker's nemesis and enemy. During the 40-minute drive through frozen pasture land, a wrinkled map on the passenger seat at his side, Fitker wondered about the mental well-being of a person who would consider farming one of the most precarious and physically dangerous ways to make a living, a weekend hobby or source of fun. Did other citizens relax on the weekends by spending their free time working at miniature construction sites? Did they dabble in restaurant work or podiatry? What happened to reading on the weekends or playing cards? Turning left as Glenk had instructed at the skeleton of VFW Hall, he traversed a final stretch of veld, broken corn stalks jutting unevenly up through the snow, that led to a vinyl-sided rambler, tenuously connected via a breezeway to a matching barn. He parked at the top of a gravel drive. The thermometer on his dashboard registered 8 degrees, so he put on his hat before giving a cordial tap to the horn. On the phone, Glenk had sounded surprised that he was coming and told him to honk when he arrived. Getting out of the car, Fitker hoped his visit might occasion something hot to drink. A coffee with whiskey would be perfect, perhaps accompanied by a leather footstool in front of a fire. Before he could make his way to the door, he heard a shout and saw Martin Glenk, T.S. Eliot's scholar, dressed in a pair of thick brown coveralls and heavy mud boots. A hunting cap with fur flaps encased his head. Like a swaggering plowboy, rather than the professor who famously required his students to spend an entire class period speaking in iambs, he jogged out of the barn. They shook hands. "So," Glenk said, "you want to take a look at the farm?" Fitker glanced longingly at the homely little rambler, the wind whistling through the cloth of his coat. "A quick look, I suppose. You grow things here in the summer?" No, it isn't that sort of farm." They turned and walked through the breezeway, the scent of manure thickening the air. "I have a pot of tomato and basil on the step, but that's it. In the summer, The only reason for the farm, Glenk said, is the donkeys. Donkeys? Miniature donkeys, Glenk said, as if the idea of a full-sized animal would be absurd. He had been raising miniatures and selling them for a dozen years. He kept a very clean stud book. Normally the Jennies would be out in the pasture, but Glenk had just given them a ration of alfalfa and brought them in because of the cold. Glancing up at the rafters in case of a hidden camera, Fitker learned of Glenk's preference for the draft horse body type. Then, on the lookout for a chance to shift the conversation to matters of business, he followed his colleague into the barn. Martin, he said, I'm hoping you and I can... His feet and his sentence came to a stop. There's something, aren't they? Glenk asked, as Fitker gazed disbelievingly at the strangely mythical-looking creatures, 2 to 3 feet tall, lifting their snouts from a series of wooden troughs. He almost expected the donkeys to speak. How many of these things do you have? 26, Glenk said, beaming as if he had sired the oddly foreshortened beasts himself. Some of the donkeys were in stalls. Others wandered freely through an indoor arena. One of them ambled over to Fitker, pushing a dove-colored nose into his pocket and leaving a foot-long smear of saliva behind. Stroking their ears and their swayed faces and proffering endearments, Glenk led Fitker on a tour of the barn. He discussed the problem of cow hocks and parrot mouth, while Fitker fended off a trio of animals that trailed closely behind him, one of them nipping now and then at his thigh. They high-stepped over a clump of turds, Fitker trying to put some distance between Glenk and himself and the donkeys. Martin, he said, I hope we can find some time to discuss some issues in the department. Glenk pointed out the boundary of his estate. Look, a decrepit grain silo at the edge of a field. There was still an hour of daylight ahead. Would Fitker like to go for a ride? Another nip at his thigh. Ow, yes. The rip in his coat was getting bigger. He felt for the car keys in his coat, imagining a 3-mile trip down a county road to a homey cafe. But Glenk had entered a shed in the corner. One of the donkeys turned its head, staring at Fitker with an ex-convict's lopsided grin. Martin, I'd be happy to drive if... The other animals, alerted perhaps by the anxiety in his voice, had begun to approach. Martin! Glenk was backing awkwardly out of the shed, the tide of animals dispersing, and Fitker saw that he was pulling behind him what could only be described as a donkey buggy or mini cabriolet. Astonishing, isn't it? Glenk asked. Fitker agreed that it was. Glenk, busying himself with halter and bridle, handed Fitker a whip, which he explained was mostly for show. Fitker was glad to accept it, but it occurred to him that given the nefarious gleam in some of the animals' eyes, he would have been safer with a 2x4 or a gun. Both men were soon seated, pressed together in the mini carriage, 2 mini donkeys in harness and ready to pull. Glenk gestured to the whip in Fitker's hand. Just a touch, he said, right there on the flank. Fitker stroked one of the donkey's buttocks with the tip of the instrument. Nothing. Glenk made a kissing sound with his mouth, ears rotating like TV antenna. The donkeys picked up their stocky, truncated legs and started to trot. They jounced in a dust-filled circle around the arena, Fitker feeling that his bones were being rattled free of their sockets. I'll stop there. They take quite a ride with the mini donkeys. That scene came to me, I suppose. Most things come to me as have an origin in real life, but I changed them enough that I think they would be completely unrecognizable. My daughter, when she was young, was horse crazy, as some girls are when they are 11, 12, 13, and we would go to a barn and she would put me in this field and say, I'll go get the tack and you stay here with this apple in your hand and, don't let the horses boss you around. And I was terrified of them. They were just too large for my taste. And she would come back and tell me, don't let those horses boss you around. But the horses always knew who was boss, and it was not me. So I turned them into mini donkeys and gave them to Martin Glenk in the book. So horse transforms into donkey in fiction.
I think you did just address one of the questions, which was about how you get your ideas. So I'll actually read a different one that you had said earlier, that you consider each piece you begin an amusing experience, and that if it doesn't work out, you chuck it. So the question is, how do you know as an author when something's working or not?
That is so hard, and I have definitely wondered, asked myself the question when I'm working on something and I'm frustrated by it, is it a larger mistake to abandon this thing and throw it away? You know, should I just keep persevering and maybe things will work out? Or, you know, am I wasting my time by continuing to work on this thing that is no longer bringing me any pleasure? At this point, I really try to remember that the reason I wanted to write in the first place was because it was fun, it was pleasurable. And even though I can't say that every time I sit down to write, I'm having fun, if most of the time I am not enjoying the writing anymore, that's time to stop for me. I need to enjoy it at least half the time, 50%. I'll take 50%. Otherwise, yeah, I'm done. And by enjoy, I mean, you know, feel invested in it, feel curious about it, want to go more deeply into whatever I'm writing.
We probably just have time for another one question or two. And so I have to ask this one that I love that came in a little earlier. Do you think there's something about faculty and English departments that lend themselves to satire?
Oh, there is. That's a good question. You know, I think any job could be satirized. Often when I ask students to write a short story and they aren't sure where to start, I'll ask them what jobs they've had in the past. I'll ask them, you know, anything from babysitting at age 13 to cutting the neighbor's lawn, working fast food, anything, because jobs are stories. You know, every job that you've had is a story. There's always a strange boss or a weird coworker or a frustrating day or a strange customer. And I think you see a lot of academic rather than other types of satires because writers hang out in academia. You know, maybe if post office workers were writers as much as English professors were, you'd see more postal satires, hair salon satires. You can satirize anything. It's just that English is where the writers often are.
And then maybe a final question that comes from a retired colleague of mine. Are you planning another academic novel? Please say yes.
You know, I took a group of students, I taught a travel writing class a couple of years ago, and I took a group of 18 students to Spain, which was terrific experience. But I have to say, the whole time I was there, I kept thinking, what would Jason Ficker have to say about taking students abroad? I kept thinking about that. He's still alive in my head.
That's wonderful. That would be a wonderful novel. He's not retired yet. That's wonderful. It is after 3, and so I do think that it's probably time to close this. I'm so grateful to you for that wonderfully insightful and enjoyable hour and your generosity in taking our questions. Thank you so much, Julie. We're especially grateful that you were willing to be with us over Zoom and make our work and our reading lives a little bit brighter. And we look forward to what you'll do next. So thank you all for joining us today. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.